Hello, my name's Eric. I'm with the Detroit BloKart Club, and today we're going to talk about how to properly install a BloKart bearing. The traditional way that I was taught, that I still see very many people use, is the old block and hammer method and pounding it onto the bearing. The problem with this is that the bearing does vibrate up and down, and the balls will do a lot of damages to the races, and it does a tremendous amount of damage to the bearing. So what we want to do today is go about a new method, which is kind of borrowed from the automotive world, on just pressing it down so you can get a proper fit. The other problem with the wood block and hammer system is the bearing can become cocked. Just a little bit inside the rim, which is going to give you a little grab, just ever so slight, but that isn't helping your speed, and it certainly isn't helping your bearing last as long as it could. So hopefully this will help you get a little bit more out of your bearings in your cart and spend more time carting. And right now we're going to start with some of the things we're going to need for this new method. What we need for the press is a threaded rod, a coarse threaded rod. I have some steel fender washers and a nut here for my base, for my anchor end of the press. Now with this threaded rod, what I've done is I've taken an old sieved bearing. Alright, and what I've done is you can take a flathead screwdriver and pound out the cage. And once that cage breaks, the best method I found is take some needle nose pliers and keep coming in, because most of these bearings, it's riveted, the cage is riveted together. You'll be left with the balls in the inner race. You get the balls, push all the balls to one side and just start hammering on that inner race, and it'll all come apart, and what you're left with is this. This is what you're left with, and this is a critical piece for your bearing press. And what this does is on the bearing, to prevent pressure going on the inner race and everything here, what you want is you want the pressure, the downward pressure as the bearing's being pressed, only on this outside edge. And what better to match that up than this? And you can see the pressure is off the seal and off the inner race, so all your pressure is going exactly to where you need it. Okay, what I've used is I have a blown out old rim. This is you can't see on the video, but the side is bowed out from, I've left it inflated in the back of my truck on a sunny day and blew out the tire in the side of the rim. So it's no longer usable as a BloKart rim, but it's a very handy tool for working. You can get yourself out of the dirt, and just the dish of the rim kind of catches bearings when you're taking them out. So what I'm going to do is you put this through here so that these washers are set like so. Now I take my BloKart wheel with no bearings in it, set this on top of here, and this gives me a good base. Now you'll notice immediately this is kind of wobbly. So what I do is I take an old bath towel, and this old bath towel kind of takes that up. What I've done is I've set this on a chair because it's just impossible to get a good vantage point for the camera. And what I've done, I've got my threaded rod through the base, setting underneath the BloKart tire with my new bearings to go in. Alright, so what I do, since this is the first bearing, I just set that in right there, right on top, and then I take, remember, the old bearing race that's now empty. It matches perfectly on the top here. Set that here. Now I also have another thick steel washer that is approximately 35 millimeters in diameter, to just a slight bit more to match the outer race. The next thing that I do is I take just a nut and I thread that on top of everything. Now at this point you want to go very slowly to make sure everything stays lined up. Once there's a little bit of tension, everything tends to kind of stay in place. Just making sure everything in your system here is lined up. It's not terribly hard, and honestly you could probably just do a couple spot welds between this washer and the old race to kind of simplify the process. I just haven't had time to do that. Here we are, we've got everything kind of finger tight at this point, and still kind of torque down, and you can just turn the nut with your finger. Alright, now about when the rod, you start seeing the rod moving, you can still kind of manipulate your things, but there's enough tension on there that it stays in place, and you still hold this. You go very slowly. Just take a wrench. She goes in a lot easier than I originally thought I could get this to go. She just turns right down. And also, with using an old bearing race, you can get the new 6303 bearings all the way down, into the proper seat, whereas it's a little more complex process with a hammer system, being that the new 17mm stud bearings are a little narrower, about 1 millimeter narrower than the old 6202s. You simply undo. We now have it flipped over to the other side. I take my bearing spacer, drop it down in there as you normally would. Set another one of your other bearing in, and repeat the process. But what we see here, you just want to make sure your spacer's not out of alignment with the bearing. You just set this up here. Just follow up with a wrench, and she goes in. And this is not a lot of effort that has to go in on torquing the wrench. It probably looks a lot harder than it is. And voila! We have our bearings installed perfectly. Everything spins nice. No little grabs in the bearing, and we're ready to go sailing. Now, I've used the old rim base. However, it is possible, if you have two of these spent bearing races, to do two at a time. As long as you can kind of keep everything aligned. And this is a much better way to do a bearing. It's not a big, complex, heavy equipment, so you could do this in the field if need be, and it's a much better way to install a bearing.